So a couple of weeks back, I decided to take a trip down memory lane and revisit the first book I ever published. Six Life of the Prophet wasn't the first book that I had written from start to finish, but it was the first one where I saw that there was something that I could work with, and while it was still rough around the edges, as any first draft should be, I was confident that I could refine it into something worth sharing. By the time I had published it back at the start of 2024, I had read the entire thing around a dozen times and I knew the story inside out. But I have not touched it since. Maybe I was just tired of looking at the same passages over and over, or maybe I was worried that I would find some mistake that I could no longer fix, or maybe I was excited to finally move on to the next project. But regardless of why, it had now been over 2 years since I had gone through it, and I wanted to see how it would hold up now that I have finished other stories that I have felt were much stronger. And now that I've read it with fresh eyes, I do have mixed feelings on it. One thing I stand by is that the premise was solid. One of my least favorite parts of the traditional publishing process is potential agents asking about books that yours is similar to, and I really felt disheartened by what felt like the industry encouraging trend chasing, which I get. I mean, to an extent this is a business, and ultimately companies want to make money. But while no idea is 100% original and everyone is inspired by something, even if they don't realize it, at no point in the writing process of Six Life of the Prophet did I sit down and say, I want to do X story but my own way. I didn't even know what exactly it was going to be. That is always the joy of discovery writing. You just head in one direction and see where the story takes you. And while I'm sure Six Life isn't the first cult-themed revenge story ever written, there wasn't any immediate comparison that popped into my head. And maybe that was part of the problem. Marketing was always such a big hurdle for me. Who do I pitch this to? Who would actually like it? And why should they bother picking this up other than because I asked them to? Book marketing is such a complex game. Like, some people zoom in on their subgenre so far to the point where they actually spoil the ending in their ads because it's the story someone specific will be looking for. And I was just never able to crack that. Another positive is the characters. I always try to make my protagonist active. I want someone to constantly push the story forward rather than just react to what's happening around them. And while Nellie's motive of wanting to avenge her family is fairly straightforward, I really emphasized how other people might just wallow in their grief and hope that their problems magically solve themselves, whereas she's actually going to do something about it. In addition, I wanted to explore how revenge always seems achievable on paper until you find yourself in the position where you can actually take it, and you have to decide whether this is really the path you want to go down. I'm happy with the rest of the cast too. All of the supporting characters have their little quirks that make them stand out from one another, and that was definitely one of my biggest fears going into any story, the fear that I would reach the end and realize that all of these people feel and sound the same, and worse, all of them feel and sound like me. But I mostly managed to avoid that. And I still think that the Prophet Joseph holds up as a compelling antagonist. When we first learn about the cult that he leads, we're told that he has allegedly died and come back to life multiple times. And I wanted to explore this idea of how and why people fall for what seems like such an obvious lie, because this is something we see time and time again in real life. If a ridiculous claim is presented in a plausible way, people will believe it. But now, unfortunately, we have to go to the parts that I'm a little more disheartened by. I don't think the pacing is bad. In fact, I think the story flows quite well. However, especially now that I've written books that were shorter than this, I do think it could have been tightened up a little bit. The story is loosely structured in a cycle with Nellie encountering the cult roughly once a week, and I do feel like it could have maybe been one cycle shorter, especially the build-up in the beginning. By the time we actually meet Uncle Joseph, a lot of the story has already passed. Then the pacing is a little rough in the middle, but I do think the last third is really solid. Also, if Chekhov read this book and saw how many guns were still loaded at the end, he might have an aneurysm. That's just the result of discovery writing. I'm still mostly a discovery writer. I don't do rock solid outlines. Sometimes I just do bullet points, and I often end up deviating from them a lot, but Six Life is the one book where I really just blindly went where the story took me. And because of that, there is some world building and a few passages that don't really have any crazy payoff at the end. And you could argue that it's more realistic that way. Like, in real life, not everything is going to be tied up neatly in a bow at the end, but I definitely feel like there are a few passages that could have just been removed if I wasn't going to dive deeper into that particular subject more. The other thing that was slightly underwhelming to me was the prose. Like I said earlier, one of my biggest fears is always having the characters seem too similar to me, and this is the biggest challenge with the protagonist, because being in someone else's head and having them be a separate person from you is more difficult than people realize. This is why I've always said that the common writing advice of write what you know isn't actually great advice, because I think it's better to write someone completely different than you, even if pieces of you are bound to seep through. And Nellie's internal monologue, particularly her sense of humor, really feels like a reflection of me. Her observational humor is really dry, and she has this disdain for small talk that feels all too familiar to me. I guess in a way I should be happy, as I can clearly see that I'm a better writer now than I was a few years ago, but the fact remains that the book is out there now in the state that it's in. It's funny because I had basically not retired from writing, but I've been on hiatus for like half a year now. The only project I've worked on in that time is the second draft of my book Testimony, which didn't take me that long, and I really only wrote that book for myself because I wanted closure. And even now, I really feel like I only have one or two more stories that I really need to tell. But I had almost thought of maybe trying to query Sixth Life of the Prophet to literary agents again. I had tried it a little several years ago before getting frustrated with the process and going the self-publishing route instead. And I had been cautious about trying to query a book now because it's already been published and I wouldn't want to make creative changes with it. Regardless of how I feel about the book today, I would not make changes. I'm not George Lucas special editioning my stories. They are what they are. But that means that with the problems I see now, the odds of a publisher picking it up are slim to none. But no matter what mixed feelings I have about it, I am still proud of the work I put into it. And the fact remains that I actually managed to see this project through to the end, which so many aspiring artists never end up doing. I can only hope that I learn from it and make my next work, if there is a next one, that much stronger. Oh, and the font. The font could have been smaller. That would have made the book as a whole smaller. That would have made the printing cost cheaper, which means I would have made more from it. Just like it's never perfect.